What is up, my fellow wizards, and welcome to the first episode of Building EDH. My name is Nick, your Golgari Obsessed Wizard, and today we're going to be building Sidisi, Brood Tyrant. Sidisi is a 4-mana Sultai Naga Shaman, 3 power, 3 toughness. Whenever Sidisi, Brood Tyrant enters the battlefield or attacks, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from your library, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. What this deck wants to do is steadily mill us out while we can incrementally mill out our opponents. It wants to get a lot of creatures in play that are going to synergize with Sidisi and keep the train rolling. We want to revive creatures, we want to ramp, we want to draw, we want to remove, all very synergetic with Sidisi. So let's show you what we did with this deck. So starting off with the artifacts, we got Altar of Dementia. So with Altar of Dementia, you sacrifice a creature. Target player puts the top number of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. This is perfect for sacrificing a zombie, milling creatures, getting zombies back, keeping a train rolling. I don't know what much else to say about this card. It works wonders in this deck. So next we're going to go with Mesmeric Orb. So whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So normally it doesn't matter how many creatures go into a graveyard. As long as Sidisi sees 1, it will trigger once and you will get 1 zombie. But Mesmeric Orb counts as an individual trigger per untapped permanent. So you're going to get a bunch of zombies hands down with Mesmeric Orb. So again, we have a lot of creatures in this deck. We're moving on to the enchantments now. Creatures you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. With Critical Fright, all your zombies can now tap for mana. Any other creatures you have out can tap for mana to just keep anything in your hand coming onto play. So next we have Animate Dead. Again, this deck wants to take advantage of the fact that we're putting a bunch of creatures into our graveyard and we want to bring them back for cheap and have them cause problems. So you can enchant a creature card in your graveyard and attach Animate Dead to it and then bring the creature onto the battlefield and it's back in play. Next we got Path of Discovery. So whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. So what that means is you reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, you put a +1/+1 counter on that creature and then put a card back or put it into your graveyard. It's your choice. So anytime it's a creature, you probably want to put it into your graveyard. It's going to create a zombie. That zombie is going to explore. That zombie is going to explore a creature from the top of your library into your graveyard, which is going to create another zombie. That zombie is going to explore. You see where I'm going with this. It is an endless loop of love and fun. Highly recommend Path of Discovery in this deck. So from the enchantments, we're going to move on to the sorceries. A lot of these sorceries are going to have a very common theme. Usually my sorceries will revive in this deck. So Dread Return, you can return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's got the added benefit of flashback, so sacrificing 3 creatures allows you to cast this card from your graveyard 1 time before it gets exiled. Just sack 3 zombies and you get your beloved creature back. It's a great deal. It's a 2-for-1. Blood for Bones, another revival card. So as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature. Again, we're probably going to be sacrificing our zombies. So you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, then return another creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Again, another 2-for-1. So I get something that I can play now or later, and I get something directly into play immediately. Soul Exchange. Soul Exchange I thought was a great card in this deck. Basically, it says sacrifices a creature, remove it from the game instead of... Sacrifice a creature, but remove it from the game instead of putting it in your graveyard. Take a creature card from your graveyard and put it directly into play as though it were just summoned. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on that creature if that creature is a thrall. The creature is never going to be a thrall, ladies and gentlemen. It's never going to be a thrall, but that's okay because it's back in play. Victimize. You choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. Again, 3 mana, and you immediately get 2 things back. Yes, they're tapped, but you're getting them back. Reanimate. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. This is great because it can also get your opponent's creatures in case they have something that's even better than what you got going on. Just another reanimate card. Very, very good. So now we're moving on to something that's not quite so reanimate. Life from the Loam. Kind of reanimate now that I think about it. So this returns lands from your graveyard to your battlefield. From your hand to your hand from the graveyard. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. with Dredge 3. So Dredge 3 means that you're going to take the top 3 cards of your library anytime that you were going to draw and instead put them into your graveyard. This is a great way to trigger Sidisi, and it's also a great way to get back any lands that Sidisi has milled in the process of playing the deck. So now we're moving on from sorceries to planeswalkers. Ashyard Dreamrender, a personal favorite in my deck. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause their controller to search their library. Great way to stop anybody from tutoring up an answer if you're going a little hard, if you're going very aggressive, if you end up being the archenemy. And then on top of that, it's -1. Target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, then exile each opponent's graveyard. Usually you want to target yourself with this if you're the Sidisi player, so you can get a zombie trigger on top of getting rid of all of your opponent's graveyards. Liliana, Death's Majesty. So this is very synergetic in the deck. It's kind of hard to ignore. It's +1, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token no matter what, and then put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. So that's 2 zombies if you hit a creature card off the top. -3 is return a target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. So we got something that mills us, and we have something that reanimates all at the same time. And if by some miracle you manage to get this card up to 7, I haven't done it once, but maybe you can destroy all non-zombie creatures. So a little board wipe in there for you. So next we have Skull Prophet. We're kind of moving on to the creatures now, and this is going to be the rest of the deck minus the land, so get ready for a lot of creatures to come up to bat. A great card. You could tap it, add a green or a black to your mana pool, or you could put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Veteran Explorer is a 1-drop, great to get out early, and whenever Veteran Explorer dies, each player may search their library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, then each player who searched their library this way shuffles it. A reminder that these come into play untapped. So if you can get Veteran Explorer to die on turn 2, you are summoning Sidisi turn 2, because you're just going to get the 2 extra lands that you needed directly into play. Circle of Dreams Druid, again, another ramp card. It's basically Gaia's Cradle on a creature. Add a forest for each creature you control. Doesn't matter if it's a token, doesn't matter if it's not. Circle of Dreams Druid's got everything you need. Salvala, Heart of the Wilds. So this is another card that's going to both draw and ramp us, which I love. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature. You can pay a green and tap it to add X mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Now we have a lot of strong creatures in this deck, and you'll see them coming up soon. Dryad Arbor. Again, just a creature that's also a land. I thought it was perfect to go in the deck. Deathrite Shaman. Very synergetic with what we got going on because our theme is dealing with the graveyard. So you can exile target card from a graveyard, add 1 mana of any color. If it's a land, if you pay a black and exile an instant or sorcery card, each opponent's going to lose 2 life. If you pay a green and tap it, exile a creature card from a graveyard, you're going to gain 2 life. Alright, so continuing to move along here. Next up, we have Birds of Paradise. Pretty standard in most decks. A 1-drop flying, 0/1, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Millikin is, again, another way to ramp that's also very synergetic with Sidisi, so you can tap it to put the top card of your library into your graveyard, and you get to add a colorless to your mana pool on top of that. World Shaper. World Shaper has the potential to really go off in this deck without any effort at all. So whenever it attacks, you may put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, which is great. It's basically just like Sidisi. But when it dies, you get to put all land cards from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. Wow. Okay. If you're playing the deck the way it wants to be played, you're going to be putting a lot of cards into your graveyard, creatures and otherwise. A bunch of them are going to be lands. It's a great way to just, boom, now all your lands are in play. The Gitrog Monster. Everybody loves the Frog Man. So we got a 5-drop Frogheart with Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice the Gitrog Monster unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns to make up for the sacrificed land that you lost. And whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you draw a card. So with Gitrog's ability, with Sidisi's ability, with any other ability that's putting anything in your graveyard, a land hits it, you're going to draw. It's that simple. So now we got Crypt Fright. As you can tell, we're kind of moving on to the creature draw portions of the deck. So this is Crypt Breaker. You can pay 2, tap, discard a card, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield, and you can tap 3 untapped zombies you control, you draw a card, and you lose 1 life. So obviously Sidisi is going to be making a bunch of zombies. This is the perfect include for the deck. And you want to notice that it says tap 3 untapped zombies you control. Because the ability is coming from this card and not from the creatures, It doesn't matter if they were just summoned. Summoning Sickness has nothing to do with this. You can create 3 zombies and immediately tap them right away to draw a card and lose a life. Toski, Bearer of Secrets, one of the newer cards in the set. I'm sorry, one of the newer cards in this deck. Came out in Kaldheim. This spell can't be countered. It's indestructible. Toski, Bearer of Secrets attacks each combat if able, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Again, with all of the creatures we're going to be making in this deck, you can go wide and you're going to be drawing a lot of cards. A lot of cards. Speaking of a lot of cards, let's go with the Sphinx that draws us a lot of cards. Consecrated Sphinx. Flying, whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2. This thing's going to get hated out, but that's okay. It's probably going to draw you at least 4 to 6 cards before that happens most of the time. Definitely keep this card in a deck. Any deck in blue. Undead Augur. So whenever Undead Augur or another zombie you control dies, you draw a card and you lose a life. Again, we're going to be making a lot of zombies thanks to Sidisi, so we might as well be taking advantage of that. Whenever they die, we're going to lose a life, but we're also going to get some card advantage. And speaking of card advantage, Arya, First of the Lothwain. So whenever Arya, First of the Lothwain, and another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. But the best part is tapping it to sacrifice another black creature, draw a card. Again, she doesn't care if you're a token or not. She just wants you to be a creature, and as long as you're a black creature, you're drawing. Very good card. Loaming Shaman, another card that I recently added into this deck. When Loaming Shaman enters the battlefield, target player shuffles any number of target cards from their graveyard into their library. This is an oh no card. If you end up milling a lot of your sorceries that need to revive your creatures, and now you have no way to revive everything that you're putting into your graveyard, you can just throw all these back, shuffle your library, and give it another go. Filth. So, Filth, I don't know how to describe how amazing this card is. So it's got Swamp Walk, and as long as Filth is in your graveyard and you control a swamp, creatures you control have Swamp Walk. Reminder that Sidisi needs to attack in order for her ability to go off or trigger after you play it from your hand or cast it from the command zone. So this is going to give Sidisi a free way to swing in, and it won't be blocked, it can't be blocked, and you're going to get another trigger off of her. Caustic Caterpillar. We're moving on to the creature removal part of this deck. So it's a 1-drop, which is great. You can play it early, and whenever you see something you don't like that's affecting your board or harming the table or threatening a win, you can pay 2, sacrifice Caustic Caterpillar, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Null-Mage Shepherd. Again, going with that ability that you can tap 4 untapped creatures you control. Does not matter if they have Summoning Sickness or not, because the ability is coming from this card, not from other creatures. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Very useful. Very, very useful. Spore Frog. Sacrifice Spore Frog, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. It's basically Fog, but it's on a creature. Perfect for Sidisi. Sidisi needs some protection, so I got Kira, Great Glass Spinner. So it's flying. Creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time in a turn, counter that spell. It includes itself. So Kira is going to protect itself as well as your entire army. Picture all of your creatures basically having a bubble on them from henceforth. Every turn they get a little bubble, and it takes 2 things to destroy anything. Wanderer. This is on the same level as Filth, but in blue. So instead of Swamp Walk, you get flying as long as Wanderer is in your graveyard and you control an island. Creatures you control have this. So again, this is one of the cards that you want to just see go into your graveyard. You're happy it's in there, and everything's going to have flying. It gives Sidisi evasion. So Dothi Voidwalker, quick inclusion into this deck because it's just super good, super volatile card, versatile. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a void counter on it, and you can tap and sacrifice Dothi Voidwalker. Choose an exiled card an opponent controls with a void counter on it. You may play it this turn without paying its mana cost. Keep in mind this thing says card, it doesn't say creature. It could be a creature, but it could literally be a land, it could be an expropriate, it could be anything. Anything you want, you get to cast for free. Fate Spinner. I put Fate Spinner in the deck as a great way to kind of slow my opponents down. I'm sure most of you have noticed that there's very little interaction in this deck because it's super focused on the creatures and what they do. So I included a lot of creatures to slow my opponents down while simultaneously speeding me up. So Fate Spinner says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player chooses Draw Step, Main Phase, or Combat Phase. The player skips each instance of the chosen step or phase this turn. Seedborn Muse. So we have a lot of creatures that tap to do things. We have a lot of creatures that want to go wide and swing on, but we don't want to leave ourselves open, so we get to untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. Spark Double. I usually use this on Sidisi, but you can use this on any creature that's currently giving you an advantage. You may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. If a creature enters the battlefield... If a creature enters with an additional loyalty counter on it, if it's a planeswalker, if it's a legendary permanent, is legendary. So this ignores the legend... I'm sorry, that sounded horrible. Basically, it becomes a copy of any planeswalker or creature, and it ignores the legendary rule. So you can make a second copy of Sidisi, and whenever Sidisi triggers, you're going to get 2 zombies for the price of 1. Kior's Follower. This is just a great card, a great utility card. So you untap another target permanent, so it basically turns 1 mana into 2 mana. It could turn any tap ability into double a tap ability, and later on in this build, you're going to see a couple of creatures that could really use this ability to make it go off. Undead Alchemist. So again, this deck wants to mill not only me, but it can get into situations where it's milling my opponents to death. So this sees and takes advantage of that. If a zombie you control would deal combat damage to a player, instead that player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from his or her library, exile that card and put a 2/2 black zombie creature onto the battlefield. Turntimber Sour. So again, we're going to be milling a lot of our lands. We want to get some advantage from milling all of our lands. So whenever 1 or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you create a 0/1 green plant creature token. You can pay a green, sacrifice 3 creatures, return target land card from your graveyard to your hand. Gerard Golgari Lichlord. So this is my pet card in the deck. When this deck was first being built, it was Gerard, and it's since evolved into Sidisi because I wanted to add blue. So Gerard Golgari Lichlord gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and you can pay 1 in Golgari to sacrifice another creature. Each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Sacrifice a swamp and a forest, return Gerard from your graveyard to your hand. So these next cards that I'm going to show you, I purposely put in this order so I could show you. Gerard's kind of a win con in this deck for the following creatures, because they can get really big really fast. So first we got Splinter Fright. Splinter Fright has Trample, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. At the beginning of your upkeep, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. So great card to play at any point in the game. It's got Trample, and it's going to see all the cards in your graveyard, and it's going to get really big. And if it's not going to be really big, each turn it's going to be a free trigger for Sidisi to potentially get some more zombos into play. Next we have Sewer Nemesis. Sewer Nemesis enters the battlefield. Choose a player. You're most likely going to choose yourself. Sewer Nemesis power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in the chosen player's graveyard, and whenever the chosen player casts a spell, that player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. So you're basically getting rewarded with zombies just by playing Magic. It's fantastic. Old Stick Fingers. So this is a card that was very, very new, just came out in Midnight Hunt. When you cast this spell, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your graveyard, then put the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. Old Stick Fingers' power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Lord of Extinction, an absolute favorite in this deck. It's one of the easiest cards to win with Gerard if Gerard's in play. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of all cards in all graveyards. It doesn't matter if they're creatures. It doesn't matter if they're yours. They just want it in the graveyard. And Lord of Extinction is usually the go-to for winning with Gerard. Consuming Aberration. So this is starting to get into the category of milling your opponents out while simultaneously beefing up this creature. Consuming Aberration's power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards, and whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card, then put those cards into their graveyard. So just by playing Magic, again, your opponents are going to be saying goodbye to a lot of their favorite cards, and Consuming Aberration is just going to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So something that you want onto the battlefield with Consuming Aberration is going to be Phoenix, God of Deception. It counts as a creature card when it's in your library, so if you mill it, you can still get a Sidisi trigger. When it's on the battlefield, it is an enchantment unless you meet its devotion cost, and creatures you control, whether it's an enchantment or a creature, have tap to Have target player put the top X cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, where X is the creature's toughness. Next we have Eternal Witness, classic card, get something back from your graveyard, very straightforward. Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, another new card from Midnight Hunt. So spells can't be countered, a great way to say protection, because again, I don't have a lot of interaction in this deck. I chose not to put a lot of counter spells because I didn't want to fill the deck with anything except for creatures. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. Again, very good card if you notice that a bunch of your instants, and in this case sorceries, that revive your creatures are in your graveyard. This is a great way to get access to them again and start getting those creatures that you mill back into play, ready to fight. Well, Drotha, kind of the same deal. I'd say the general in this deck, you could switch this out with Sidisi and it would do just as good. During each of your turns, you may play up to one permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. So any artifact, any enchantment, any creature, any planeswalker, anything that's a permanent, you can just get back from the graveyard, one of each per turn. It's fantastic. Whisper Blood Liturgist, so you can tap, sacrifice 2 creatures, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Ruminap Excavator, you may play land cards from your graveyard. Again, in this deck, you're going to be putting a lot of lands in the graveyard. You want to make sure you have ways to get them back. Ruminap is just a cheap way to make that happen. Next, you got Nyx Weaver. It's Reach. And at the beginning of your upkeep, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. It's got a neat little ability where you can pay 3 to exile it and return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So if you ever mill something you absolutely need in a pinch, he's gone. And in the meantime, he's collecting zombies for Sidisi each turn for free. Hedron Crab, again, something great you're going to find in the early game. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. This could be a situational card. If you get it out early and you don't have Sidisi out yet, you can always start milling your opponents. Or if you have a lot of revival in your hand, you can start milling yourself early and hope you can get one of those big creatures out. Sir Conrad the Grim, I feel like an auto-include in this deck. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. You can pay 2. Each player puts the top card of your library into your graveyard. So he helps activate his own ability, all while getting you zombies. And whether somebody wipes the board, whether you're milling people, whether you're milling yourself, everyone's going to be taking damage. Nobody likes Sir Conrad, but in this deck, he's one of your best friends. Fauna Shaman, great card for tutoring up all the creatures that you need, especially in the early game. You want to get your mana dorks out really quick, or it's late or mid-game and you want to start seeing your bigger creatures come out. Discard a creature card, search your library for a creature, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. This is also a great way to get some of the bigger creatures that you currently have in your hand into the graveyard so you can play a cheap reanimation spell and get it out without having to pay super expensive cards. Speaking of super expensive cards, here are some of the cards that people go, ugh, when they see. You love to hear it though, don't you? With Michaeus the Unhollowed. It is a 6-drop, 5/5, zombie cleric with Intimidate. Whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it. Other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Undying. Undying says that whenever a creature dies, it'll come back to the battlefield immediately with a +1/+1 counter on it. This is amazing. So anytime anybody wants to get rid of all your stuff, no problem. It's going to come back even stronger, ready to play. Living Death. So again, we have our reanimation cards. Each player exiles all cards from his or her graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures he or she controls, then puts all cards he or she exiled this way onto the battlefield. Doom Whisperer. This card puts in work in this deck. It's kind of hard to ignore. You pay 2 life, surveil 2. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, then put any number of them into the graveyard, the rest of the bottom of your library in any order. Pay 2 life, mill a creature, make a zombie, pay 2 life. You get the idea over and over and over and over. It makes an instant army, and it's fantastic in this deck. Next, we got Buried Alive, another revival card. You search your library for up to 3 creature cards and put them into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Next, we have Perpetual Timepiece. Put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, exile Perpetual Timepiece, shuffle any number of target cards from your graveyard into your library. Again, just another way to protect any special pieces that you get into your graveyard. A lot of people are going to notice that you're playing your graveyard very quick, and they're going to want to get rid of your important pieces. So pay 2 at any time and protect your pieces, get them back into the library, and they get another shot at redemption. All right, so this is one of the newest includes in the deck. This is coming from Crimson Vow. Old Rustine. So when Old Rustine enters the battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. If a land card is milled this way, create a treasure token. If a creature card is milled this way, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If a non-creature, non-land card is milled this way, create a blood token. Very synergetic in this deck. Another card from Crimson Vow, Archghoul of Thraben. It's a 3-drop zombie cleric, and whenever Archghoul of Thraben or another zombie you control dies, look at the top card of your library. If it's a zombie card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put that card into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. So, again, any zombie, it doesn't matter if it's a token or not, and you're primarily going to be seeing zombie tokens in this deck. Whenever they die, you just get to replace them, basically. Sheol-Loudred Whispering One. So now we're getting into some of the Praetors in this deck. I chose to include all the Praetors in Sultai in this deck. The original Vorinclex, Jin-Gitaxias, Sheol-Loudred Whispering One, kind of representing the main 3 things that a deck wants to do. So you want removal, you want draw, and you want ramp. I'll quickly go through each of these. So Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, has trample, and whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and of any type that land could produce. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during each controller's untap step. So your land's double, their land's half, basically. They can't use them for a little bit. Jin-Gitaxias can come out with Flash, and at the beginning of your end step, draw 7 cards. Each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. Again, you're drawing a bunch of cards. Your opponents are losing them. And then again, Sheol-Loudred, it's got Swamp Walk, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you return a target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. All right, now we're moving on to some of the more powerful cards / win cons in the deck. We got Razzaketh, the Foul-Blooded, flying, trample, you pay 2 life, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a card, and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. Again, you can search for any card you want, but the main cards you're probably going to be searching for are the next 2 that you're going to see, which are primary win conditions for the deck, other than going wide with creatures and potentially winning with Gerard. You got Thassa's Oracle, because again, there's a very good chance that you're going to end up milling yourself. You want him in your hand or at the ready so you can play him and simply win the game. And then the primary win condition in this deck, Craterhoof Behemoth, the big hoof daddy. So it's got haste, and when Craterhoof Behemoth enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. This deck wants to constantly play creatures. It doesn't matter how many times your opponent's board wipe. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a big board. Craterhoof is a great way to finish off anybody who's lingering, finish off everybody at once. I've won almost, I'd say, 60% of the games that I've won with Sidisi have won because Craterhoof manages to find its way onto the battlefield. So now we are going to go to the lands of the deck, starting with the lands that can potentially tap or can tap for any color, starting with Reflecting Pool. Of course, you have Command Tower. Opulent Palace taps for all 3 of our colors. It's basically a tapped Command Tower. Another tapped Command Tower with Zagoth Triome has the added ability to pay 3 and cycle. Overgrown Tomb, Twilight Mirror, right into our duels now. Jungle Hollow, Breeding Pool, Sunken Hollow, Flooded Grove, Simic Growth Chamber, and Golgari Rot Farm. A lot of people don't like having these dual lands in there. I chose to keep them in there because if I get these early, I can play them and end up discarding a card, but that's okay because I could just discard a giant creature that I could get back cheaper with a revival spell. Westfell Abbey, because we're going to be creating a bunch of zombie tokens, we might as well sacrifice those zombie tokens to create Ormondal, Profane Prince, with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste, and 9/7, quite the powerhouse and very hard to get rid of. Next utility land is Field of the Dead. Enters the battlefield tapped, but as long as you have 7 lands of different names, you basically have landfall, create a zombie. Herborg. So Herborg is a great way to keep our mana fixed if we are needing any swamps. It's also the perfect card to pair with Filth in your graveyard. because you need to have swamp. You need to have a swamp in order for your creatures to have swamp walk. Herborg forces all of your opponents to have swamps, so there's no way that there's no way that Sidisi can fail to swing out. Verdant Catacombs, just really good fetch land. Pay 1 life, sacrifice Verdant Catacombs, search your library for either a forest or a swamp. Prismatic Vista, basically the same thing, but for basic lands. Failed Passage, again, the same thing, but as long as you have 4 or more lands, it'll have the basic land come into play untapped, which is nice. And then we are running 4 forests in the deck. We are running 3 swamps, and we are running 3 islands. Thanks again for watching and making it to the end of the video. If you want to keep up with everything EDH outside of YouTube, links to all the socials are in the description below. If you found this valuable in any way, I'd really appreciate it if you can like and subscribe. It's going to help the channel grow. I'm just starting things out, and I know I've got a lot to learn about YouTube and about editing, but I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. I can only get better from here, and I hope you'll join me on this journey.